So one thing I've noticed is that a lot of people that come to carnivore and a lot of people that follow animal-based diets suffer from histamine intolerance. I actually fall into that camp because when I came to carnivore, I had a pretty severe histamine intolerance. Now, granted, I was riddled with a plethora of other chronic conditions, just like a lot of the other people that end up landing on carnivore because it's basically an act of desperation trying to heal yourself and recover from all this crazy stuff that we're dealing with and plagued with as a nation in today's modern age. But histamine intolerance is very, very common. And in this video, I'm going to share my experience with histamine intolerance, how I was able to completely overcome it, and why when you fully understand it, it's not actually as difficult as it might seem. If you're new to Apex, my name is Jacob, and back in 2017, I had my health completely destroyed. Really out of the blue. And after being failed by the medical industry and trying diet after diet after diet, trying to heal myself, I eventually landed on carnivore. And through that experience, I learned a heck of a lot about what works and what doesn't work in terms of natural healing. And that's the kind of stuff I share on this channel. So if that kind of stuff resonates with you, consider liking and subscribing so you don't miss a future video. And let's dive right in. All right, so first off, let's just talk about what histamine is. Histamine is actually very essential to have in the body. It's a natural chemical process that occurs, but the problem comes from when you have an imbalance of histamine and your body's natural ability to clear that histamine from your body. So to better understand and describe histamine, let's use a really quick analogy here. All right, so let's say that your body is a house. All right, your house is pretty secure and you have a state-of-the-art alarm system, a security system. And that security system has state-of-the-art monitoring systems. All right, it basically checks everything. It checks all the windows, doors. It's constantly monitoring the perimeter. It's monitoring everything about your house. And if it suspects something is off, it has a notification system that sends a response directly to the police. And they can respond pretty much straight away. All right, so they come and they fight the bad guys. They do all this stuff to keep your house safe. All right, so the house is your body. The notification system, we'll call that histamine. And the cops, we'll call that your body's immune response. Okay, so let's say that you have a foreign invader, an intruder. All right, that's going to be a foreign invader. That's going to be some sort of negative stimuli to the body. And let's say that foreign invader comes to your house and he starts pounding on your door. So your security system is going to know that. And it's going to get slightly inflamed. It's going to get irritated. It's going to keep a real close eye on this foreign invader to make sure nothing crazy happens. But let's say this invader, he breaks your door in and he comes in, he just starts tearing the walls up. You know, he's got a hammer, busting the drywall. He's smashing dishes. He's ripping up carpet. He's doing all kinds of bad stuff. He's causing inflammation inside your house. He's messing your house up. It's not a good thing. Well, your notification system, your state-of-the-art security system, it notifies the cops. So the cops, they respond. Those are white blood cells. The cops flood into your home. They take out the foreign invader. They take out the negative stimuli and they kick it out. And to drill that down even further, we'll say that your security system is mast cells. All right, because mast cells in your body serve as an alert for your immune system. And that alert, it notifies your body of any potential attackers, aka the foreign invaders that are knocking on your door. That same process is playing out every single day when you consume foods that are high in histamine, when you get insect bites, when you get stung by a wasp, when you have an infection, and really when you have any kind of negative stimuli that's occurring to the body. This stuff is happening inside your body. So as you can see, this process, it's very important. And this is something that you want to actually have happen in your body. But the problem is that histamine is inflammatory. All right, so if too much builds up in your body, so in other words, if you get too many foreign invaders inside your house, that's going to cause a severe problem. And it's going to cause a very, very strong response from the authorities to come in your house and try and kick these bad guys out. And when you get too many cops in your house, that in itself can become very problematic, especially if you don't have a way to get these foreign invaders or the cops out of your house just becomes extremely overwhelmed. And that essentially sums up histamine intolerance. That is exactly what happens when you have histamine that builds up in your body and that can't be properly cleared by your body. You essentially have a buildup that creates a very strong inflammatory response. It creates a very strong immune response, and that can be very, very problematic. So in a nutshell, histamine intolerance is an imbalance between the buildup of histamine in your body and your body's ability to rid it from your body. And the bad thing about this is that when you're consuming foods that are high in histamine, that stuff can build up in your body over time, and it can take hours, days, weeks, and sometimes even months for your body to actually be able to clear that from your body if you have an issue with clearing histamine. So how exactly do you know that you have histamine intolerance? That's actually very easy. And I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, you probably already know that you have histamine intolerance, or you're pretty suspect to it because the symptoms can be very, very annoying and pretty severe. So some things you might experience if you have histamine intolerance would be itchiness, swelling, hives, allergies, food allergies, watering eyes, runny nose, welts on the body. This is something I experienced, so I would actually do little experiments on myself, and I would scratch myself with my fingernail and it would whelp up like a bee sting just by scratching myself very lightly. All right, so that's a very telling indicator that you have histamine intolerance. Fatigue, brain fog, headaches, migraines, those are also very telling indicators that you might have histamine intolerance. Irregular heartbeat, low blood pressure, swollen lips, tongue, or throat, shortness of breath, bloating, and some other symptoms that you might experience are nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, and even irregular or painful periods. All right, so as you can see, histamine intolerance can cause a bunch of different symptoms that are not ideal. This is not something that you really want to deal with. So if you have this problem, you want to get it taken care of as fast as possible. All right, so now let's talk about what causes histamine intolerance. And this is where we get into being able to actually fix it, because once you know what causes it, you can address the problem. All right, so some of the most common causes of histamine intolerance and some of the things that can lead to histamine intolerance are things like parasites. All right, when you have parasites in your body, they can cause general disruption in the body, and they also release a ton of toxins and stuff in your body, which overloads your detox systems, your detox pathways, and your body can't detox properly. It also hinders your body's natural ability to absorb nutrients, and the inflammation that it causes in your gut can block a lot of the enzymes that are supposed to come out to help clear histamine, and that can also lead to histamine intolerance. Parasites can also lead to things like leaky gut, which causes inflammation in the gut, general gut dysbiosis, and can cause your stomach to release foreign particles into your body, causing even more inflammation, overloading your body's natural detox pathways, and leading to histamine intolerance. Candida is another big one for all those exact reasons I just mentioned, and that would also include fungus and yeast. That stuff goes hand in hand. It's kind of all one and the same. So if you have any of that stuff living in your gut, or any kind of gut dysbiosis, including things like SIBO, that could eventually lead to histamine intolerance. Heavy metal toxicity is another really big one, because heavy metals, they build up in your body over time and they cause general dysfunction in your body. They can also lead to gut dysbiosis, candida and parasites, and a lot of other really bad negative health outcomes, including autoimmune disorders. So if you have heavy metal toxicity, there is a pretty good chance that it could eventually lead to histamine problems later down the road. And speaking of autoimmune conditions, that is also something that can lead to histamine intolerance, because histamine intolerance and autoimmune conditions kind of go hand in hand. You can almost think of histamine intolerance as an autoimmune response, because when you have all this histamine building up in your body, it's essentially an autoimmune response that your body will be having continuously until that histamine is cleared out of your body. Certain diseases can lead to histamine intolerance, specifically things like tick-borne illnesses. Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, all these things could eventually lead to histamine intolerance. As I mentioned before when I was talking about parasites and candida, leaky gut is another big one, because when you have leaky gut or gut permeability, your gut isn't able to hold the food in your stomach like it should, and you have a lot of foreign particles that are being released through your gut lining into your bloodstream. And as those foreign particles get circulated throughout your body, that causes a tremendous amount of inflammation in the body. And something else to consider is that when you have leaky gut, there's a pretty good chance that you have inflammation in the gut in general. And there's a pretty good chance that you have some form of gut dysbiosis. And when you have loose gut junctions and you have gut dysbiosis and all these bad things going on in your gut, then the enzymes that your gut would naturally release to break down histamine aren't being released properly. And that leads to histamine intolerance. Mast cell activation can also lead to histamine intolerance because, like I mentioned before, mast cells are actually the alert system for your body's immune response. And if you have mast cell activation, that means that essentially your mast cells are in a perpetual cycle of alerting the police, alerting the authorities, and alerting your body's immune response to come in and take care of business. And if that's happening all the time, that's essentially an autoimmune disorder. And that's going to lead to a lot of inflammation and a lot of disarray within the body. And one of the most important factors that can lead to histamine intolerance, and this ties into all the stuff I just mentioned, is low levels of DAO in the body. And DAO is short for diamine oxidase. All right, so diamine oxidase is produced by the kidneys, thymus, and intestinal lining, and specifically the small intestine. All right, so with that in mind, you can see that when you have gut dysbiosis, things like SIBO, Candida, parasites, or all that other stuff I just mentioned, because a lot of the DAO comes from your small intestine, those problems in the gut can lead to your body not being able to produce enough DAO, which will lead to histamine intolerance. And there's a lot of factors that can lead to gut dysbiosis and general disarray in the body and in the gut. And a major contributor is diet. Hyperprocessed food is absolutely terrible for your gut and can lead to a lot of the stuff I just talked about. Certain medications like NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, can also do this. Antibiotics and certain antidepressants can also release histamine in the body, and some can inhibit DAO production. So the bad thing about this is that if you have a lot of the problems I just talked about, then simply adopting a carnivore diet or any clean way of eating is not going to resolve your histamine intolerance. You have to actually go in and address the root of the problem. So if you have parasites, you need to address the parasites and you need to rid those from your body. Same thing for Candida, same thing for heavy metals, the same thing for a lot of that stuff I just talked about. So luckily for you, if you are suffering from histamine intolerance and you've tried all this other stuff, including diet and nutrition, to cure your histamine intolerance to no avail, I do have videos on my channel, which I will link below, on how I eradicated parasites and candida from my body, and also how I healed my very destroyed gut and cured and overcame leaky gut. So once you finish this video, be sure to check those out and take action on that if you think you might have those problems. All right, so in the interim, there are some things that you can do to lower your histamine load if you do have histamine intolerance. The number one thing is going to be diet. All right, and this is normally where I would be like, carnivore diet's the way to go. Eat carnivore, it's going to solve all your problems. For histamine intolerance, that is not the case. So I'm not going to say that adopting a carnivore diet is going to solve histamine intolerance. It's just not going to happen. But what you can do to lessen your histamine load and reduce your histamine symptoms is avoid certain foods. All right, so the number one food you want to avoid is anything canned. Canned goods, especially canned meat, are very, very high in histamine, and I've found that canned fish is one of the highest in histamine that you can possibly consume. So that is something you absolutely want to avoid if you have histamine problems. All right, so right here, I always have some examples handy. I've got some canned mackerel off the menu. Don't eat it, all right? I also have some canned salmon off the menu. Do not eat this. You will have very, very bad histamine response. There's some canned chicken off the menu. Sardines, oysters, any kind of canned food. Just avoid it completely. Put it out of your mind. Eat fresh meat. All right, and that brings me to my second point. So you also want to avoid any kind of aged meat. So if you like aged steaks, or if you're buying meat that is not immediately fresh, I would not consume that, because any kind of meat that has been aged, even for a few days, is going to have some elevated levels of histamines. Your best option is always going to be eating very, very fresh meat, and the best way to do that is to buy your meat from a local producer. All right, so find a butcher shop, find a local farmer in your area, and see if they can sell you very fresh meat straight off the animal if possible. Meat that has been refrigerated or frozen for extended periods of time is going to be higher in histamine. And a little known fact is that most meat, I'm talking like up to 85% of the meat that is found on grocery store shelves, is imported from foreign countries, okay? Even if it has a USDA product of the United States label on there, it's still imported from a foreign country. How do they get away with that? Because they import the meat in big chunks and then they process it in a US-based meat packing facility. It's as simple as that. So you can pretty much assume that if it's traveling across the world, it's going to be high in histamine because it's going to be aged and it is not going to be fresh. Another food that is very high in histamine is going to be anything that is cured. All right, so cured meats, off the menu. So that would be things like ham or bacon or sausages, or anything that is processed meat is usually cured or is definitely not fresh, so you don't want to consume that. That also includes things that are fermented. So if you're eating fermented vegetables or animal products, off the menu. Very, very high in histamine. Anything that is smoked is another category of foods that you want to avoid, because anything smoked is going to be very high in histamine. That includes smoked meat. So if you like smoked brisket like I do, unfortunately, until you get histamine intolerance under control, that is going to be off the menu unless you want to deal with histamine symptoms. Cheese, and especially aged cheese or things like blue cheese, that is something that you probably don't want to consume because it's going to be very high in histamine. Anything that is shelf stable, you can assume that is going to be old and not fresh, so it's probably going to be high in histamine. Something else I've found that can sometimes cause histamine intolerance and histamine intolerance related symptoms is certain types of fat, specifically suet or tallow. And for the longest time, I didn't really understand why that was happening. I thought it was just because suet and tallow are things that aren't really that fresh. It's pretty much assumed that they're going to be sitting around for a while before they're consumed. But through my research, come to find out, lymphatic DEO secretion stimulated by fat absorption is linked to histamine release. And one other food that can be high in histamine and can be problematic for some people, unfortunately, is bone broth. So if you're buying bone broth or you're making your own bone broth and it is not extremely fresh, there is a chance that it is going to be higher in histamine, and that could lead to histamine-related issues. So if you are suffering from histamine intolerance and you're constantly getting histamine-related symptoms, there are some things that you can do to clear that from your body as quick as possible. So the first thing is fasting. Fasting is very good for clearing histamine from your body because it gives your body a chance to rest. You're not adding more histamines to your body, and it gives your body a chance to detox and clear that stuff from your system. All the keto and carnivore people out there are going to hate me for this, but consuming meals that are lower in fat can also be a very good tool for clearing histamine from the body. Like I mentioned before, fat can actually influence the amount of DAO your body releases. So if you're eating meals that are very high in fat, it could be inhibiting your body's ability to release DAO. So by temporarily reducing the amount of fat you consume, that is also going to allow your body a chance to rest, which could potentially allow your body to create more DAO, which is then going to clear histamine from your body. And with that said, there are also a couple natural compounds that are very powerful in clearing histamine from the body. And the first one, and my personal favorite, is quercetin. All right, so this is quercetin with bromelain, and this is a very powerful tool in clearing histamine from the body. So if you're running into histamine issues and you just need to get it cleared out of your body quickly, this can help. And it's worth mentioning that I am not sponsored by or affiliated with any of these products. This is stuff I've actually used and I've gotten really good results from. My number 2 pick for clearing histamine from the body is N-acetylcysteine. All right, NAC. NAC boosts glutathione in the liver and helps your body naturally detox. This is very powerful. Now, it is worth mentioning that there are some studies out there that show NAC increases the release of histamine from mast cells, which can lead to histamine reactions. But that has not been my experience. My experience with NAC has been very positive, and anytime I've taken this to help clear histamine from my body, it has worked very well. So conversely, there are also studies out there that show that experience. It shows that NAC can be very powerful in clearing histamine from the body. So I think it really depends on the person. All right, and my 3rd pick is milk thistle. Milk thistle does a lot of the same stuff that NAC does. It boosts glutathione production in the liver, and it helps open up your body's natural detox pathways. It's also an antioxidant that has anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, and antiviral properties. All right, so this is very powerful as well. And every time I've taken this to help clear histamine from my body, I've seen very good results. And last but not least, my 4th pick would be stinging nettle. All right, this is tea form. This is very natural, and essentially it's just like milk thistle. It's a phytochemical, a plant defense chemical that can be very good at reducing allergies in the body, okay? So anytime I've taken this for histamine intolerance, I've also seen very good results. So while all those things are very good tools and they can be used to clear histamine from the body, it's not going to actually cure the root of the problem, all right? So if you want to cure histamine intolerance and get rid of this for good and not have to rely on that stuff I just mentioned, you're going to need to address the root cause of your histamine intolerance. So step 1 is going to be removing high histamine foods from your diet. So all those foods I mentioned before, don't consume any of that stuff. You want to only consume nutrient-dense foods that are low histamine. So proper diet nutrition is fundamental. Step 2 is cleansing and detoxification. All right, so if you have any of that other stuff I mentioned, things like candida, parasites, heavy metal toxicity, leaky gut, H. pylori, any of that stuff, any kind of gut dysbiosis or disarray in the body, you want to address that, clear that bad stuff from your body, and start to heal. I will put links in the description below to all the videos I have on these topics. Step 3 is going to be to seal and heal the gut. That also means that proper nutrition is very key, because if you're consuming inflammatory foods, you're consuming grains, nuts, seeds, leafy greens, or foods that are going to cause gut dysbiosis or leaky gut, or are going to damage your gut or cause inflammation in your body, all that stuff is going to prevent you from overcoming histamine intolerance. It is imperative that you consume nutrient-dense, bioavailable foods that are low inflammatory. And at this point, I will mention the carnivore diet, because the carnivore diet is the diet that contains all those foods that are low inflammatory, very healing, and very nourishing. So if I was trying to overcome histamine intolerance, I would do exactly what I did before, which is adopt a low carb, zero carb carnivore diet, or at least center my diet around animal-based products. Now, with all that said, the most key and fundamental step in overcoming histamine intolerance is to include DAO in the diet. Okay, now you can get DAO supplements, that is an option, but I have found the most powerful, profound way of overcoming histamine intolerance and including more DAO in the diet is to consume kidney. All right, specifically beef kidney. And this is no joke, and it really highlights how powerful this can actually be. But when I started doing that, after just 2 or 3 weeks, I saw dramatic improvements in histamine intolerance to the point where I was able to eat canned fish again. All right, so I started off with things like sardines just to gauge my tolerance to see how I would respond. And I was able to tolerate that with no problem whatsoever. Whereas before, it would have destroyed me. I would have had itchy eyes, runny nose, my throat would have been itching. I would have probably had like very itchy skin and all these negative responses. But just 2 or 3 weeks of including kidney in my diet had that profound of a result. So if you're trying to overcome histamine intolerance and you do all those steps I just mentioned before, and you include DAO in your diet for every single meal, or as much as you can tolerate, I can almost guarantee that you will overcome histamine intolerance without too much of a problem. Unless you're dealing with some other underlying condition, like an autoimmune disorder or certain chronic diseases, DAO is almost certainly going to fix your histamine issues. And it's just like I've mentioned in some of my previous videos, but when you have a problem with a specific organ or a specific part of the body, you consume that part of the body to heal that part of your body. So it's no coincidence that DAO is produced by the kidneys, thymus, and intestinal lining. And when you consume kidney, which is very high in DAO, it naturally boosts DAO in your body, and it gives your body the building blocks to start producing DAO naturally. But it is important to keep in mind that if you have underlying conditions and you have things like parasites, candida, gut dysbiosis, or other chronic conditions that can hinder and inhibit your body's ability to absorb DAO, even if you're consuming it in your diet. So keep that in mind. You are going to have to eradicate that bad stuff from your body, and you are going to have to heal in order for this to work. Now, the way I prepare kidney is very, very simple. I usually just take the pieces that I've cut up and put in the freezer. I'll take, a couple ounces of that, boil it in a pot just for 5-10 minutes, and then I'll just sear that in a pan, cast iron skillet, and then consume it that way. When you fry it in a cast iron skillet, add a little salt and a little fat, it's actually not too bad. Now, there is one other thing that can help with histamine intolerance, and that is probiotics. When talking about probiotics, it is important to be very, very intentional about what probiotics you consume, because some probiotics can actually be prohistamine, and they can cause more histamine to build up in the body. But there is a list of bacteria that are non-histamine promoting bacteria. And when you populate the gut with those bacteria and they take over the histamine promoting bacteria, that can lead to lowered histamine levels in the body, which is exactly what you want. Now, I'm really bad at pronouncing the names of these bacteria, so I'm just going to flash these up on the screen, and I'll also list those in the description below. One important note about probiotics is that you don't want to include probiotics in the diet if you still have a form of gut dysbiosis. So if you're dealing with candida, yeast, fungus, or SIBO, or any other form of gut dysbiosis, you want to wait until you have that stuff completely eradicated from your body before you include probiotics. And the reason for that is because a lot of times if you have an overgrowth of bacteria in the gut, adding more bacteria can just be like adding fuel to the fire. It can actually do more harm than good. So you want to make sure you have those issues resolved, and then you can start adding probiotics in there. So when I was sick and I was dealing with all these crazy health issues, I tried a lot of different probiotics, all right? And some of those probiotics caused very severe histamine reactions. But there is one probiotic I finally found that has a lot of the probiotic strains that are actually low histamine or histamine demoting, all right? And that is Multi-9. Again, not sponsored by this. This is the one I actually landed on, and it did play a very fundamental role in me being able to overcome histamine intolerance. So this is the one I would recommend, and there are links in the description below to all these products. So if you want to read more about these, if you want to research them, or if you want to buy them, there will be links below to every single one of these products I've mentioned. And that, in a nutshell, is exactly how I overcame histamine intolerance. And the way I've kept that at bay for about 4 years now is that I just focus on low inflammatory, nourishing foods. I adopted a carnivore diet 5.5 years ago. I've stuck with that, But I also make sure to include organs in my diet occasionally, specifically kidney. And if at any point I feel histamine symptoms creeping back up, I will temporarily stick to lower fat foods. I will periodically fast. I will rely on those supplements I mentioned before. I will sometimes revert back to probiotics. I will temporarily reduce aged, canned, smoked, or cured meats. And I will dramatically up my intake of beef kidney in my diet. And it's as simple as that. Now that I am healed and being properly nourished, making those very simple adjustments has allowed me to be histamine intolerance free for a very long time now. And for that, I'm extremely grateful, because histamine intolerance, it sucks pretty bad. So if you're dealing with that, I can totally relate. But hopefully this gives you some clarity and helps you understand that overcoming it is not really that complicated, and it can absolutely be done. So if you got some value out of this, comment the word histamine below so we can bump the algorithm and get this out to more people. And if you're like me and you're suffering from histamine intolerance or histamine related issues, feel free to share your experience below. That kind of stuff can really help other people in the tribe and can really help us understand that we're not alone.